This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. There is no original date given for this interview. The interview was conducted by Mr. Frank Doyle. The interviewee is Mr. L. A. Macklenburg of Oklahoma City. This interview is being re-recorded on April the 5th, 1985, for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
One of my breath is down here. Reading.
No, we got it. Oh, the thing works. The thing works very well. So actually all this is, you can see we're working. All this is the conversation, Mr. Mecklenburg, is to find out a little bit about your tenure here in Oklahoma City, when you started, why you came, and from where you came. You've been here now how many years, sir?
Since 1903, 61 years.
And you came from where?
Minnesota, western Minnesota.
Where in western Minnesota?
A little town by the name of Echo with about 300 people.
Is that the home of the Mecklenburgs, of your
Yes,
family?
that's right.
How many were in your family, sir?
There were 8 of us, my mother and father, 4 boys and 2 girls.
Mm-hmm. It'd be interesting to find out why you came to Oklahoma City.
Well, I'll try to tell you very briefly. My father had gone to Seattle, Washington. He had grub-staked a man to go up to the Klondike during the gold strike.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very much impressed with going to Washington. And my mother, of course, was born and educated in Philadelphia. And she saw no opportunity for 4 boys in this little town.
Mm-hmm.
And she loved the South, and she loved Oklahoma. And so we decided to come to Oklahoma. And we left this little town. My father and my oldest brother were in a boxcar with their horses and the cow, the buggy, and the furniture. And we got on the train and started for Oklahoma. Well, it was a very interesting trip. Of course, my mother had a big basket full of sandwiches, and I think it took us 3 days and 2 nights to get here by train. But we all enjoyed it immensely. I remember distinctly, we were sitting in the old depot in Kansas City. That's before they built the new one. The flood had just been over that year of 1903. And they had a lot of boys running around there looking after baggage and this, that, or the other. They called them red caps.
Mm-hmm.
So as a lad, I went up to one of these red caps and said, when does the train leave for Oklahoma? And he said, whereabouts in Oklahoma? And I couldn't tell him. I just knew we were going to Oklahoma. So I had to go back to my mother and ask him what town we were going to, and he told me Kingfisher.
Mm-hmm.
So we arrived in Kingfisher, Oklahoma. And that year was a drought, and the dust blew, and we didn't care much for that area at that particular time. However, I still have a lot of love for Kingfisher because it's a great town. I went to school there. But we eventually moved up where the ground was black instead of red up in K County.
How old were you, sir, when you got to Kingfisher?
I was 14. Mm-hmm. And we moved up to K County and stayed there a short time. And then I came down to Oklahoma City in 1905 looking for a job. They were at that time just building the Overholser Theater, which at the moment they're tearing down, which I hate to see destroyed. But you asked me the reason we came to Oklahoma. It was because my mother wanted an opportunity for us boys. And she prevailed, and we all did quite well.
What are your brothers' names that came with you, sir?
My brother's names?
Yes, sir.
We called the oldest one Mac, and Gus, and Bob, and Lou. That were the four of us. And I had two sisters, Alma and Carolyn. Those two sisters are still alive, but I am the only one of the men of the family that have survived.
Where do the sisters live now, sir?
They live here in Oklahoma City. Of the whole family of 8 of us, there's never any one of us ever left Oklahoma City. We've all lived here from that time until their death.
What was your impression as a youngster when you walked into Oklahoma City or came in?
Well, I was greatly impressed because Oklahoma City in 1905 was already quite a town. I think they had 20,000 people or 28,000, something like that. And of course, coming out of a western town out of western Minnesota, where I'd never seen a brick building before, why, Oklahoma City looked pretty damn good to me, I'll tell you that. But the main thing was, when we come down here, was to find a job. And I did get the first job working for a fella that was building brick fireplaces. And I was mixing the mortar and the brick and carrying them to this fella, and he built the fireplaces. But they were just getting ready for the state fair. And the state fair, in my opinion, was one of the starts of Oklahoma City becoming a city. It was just the beginning, see. But they had no streetcars out there, and there was no way to get to the fairground except to drive. So the Katy Railroad shuttled the trains back and forth and carried the crowd out to the fairground.
Now, is that the same area that the fairground
No, that
occupied?
is the area out here on the east side of town. That's the area on the east side of town. At that time, the fair was privately owned. Henry Overholser and a fellow by the name of C.P. Sipes and C.G. Jones were the principal owners of the fair. And my oldest brother worked for them. And I got a job with the Fair Association, selling the advertising on a wood fence that was around the fair. And I remember distinctly selling an ad to Richards and Conover hardware store that went all the way across the old wood grandstand they had, and they paid $90 for this ad. The ad was about 100 foot long, and they paid $90 for the ad and for the painting of it. And then I had quite a little to do with the fair from that time on. I was always interested in the state fair. Fact of the matter is, if it hadn't been for the fair, I do not believe that I would be in the business that I am in today.
Why is that, sir?
Well, I'll tell you why. I loved the fair. I run a hamburger stand out there for 2 years. Made about $100 each time, was big money in that time. And you sold a whole hog and a biscuit for 5 cents. And I was the chief vocalist for this hamburger stand, and my job was to call them in. The rest of the family cooked the hamburgers and handed them out.
You mean it was a family affair? Your
Yes,
sister?
always a family affair, which our present business started the same way.
Correct.
And Then we got along to the point. I had spent about 10 years of my life in working in a bank in Oklahoma City.
That was after your stint at the fair?
Oh, yes, after that, yes.
Who were some of the people that you met during your time at the fair as you started out there with the advertising that you were selling and also the hamburger stand?
Well,
Some of them still around today?
yeah, very few of them. Very few of them. The ranks are getting thinner all the time. But I believe at that time, having spent 10 years in the bank, and I was given this job because...
What bank was that?
What?
What bank?
It at that time was the Oklahoma State. Later became the Tradesman National, and now was taken over by the First National.
Mm-hmm.
But the fair had to do with the business I'm in to this extent. My wife and I had built a little house out on East Park Street, and the street wasn't paved, and it was on a red hill. And that fall, the wind just blew every day, and you could not keep the dust and dirt out of that house. You'd wipe the dust off, and in 1 hour it was back on.
Uh-huh.
So my wife said, Lou, we're going to have to put something on these windows to keep this dust out.
Excuse me for interrupting you. Now, you said your wife. She was whom and when did you meet her? You meet her in Oklahoma City?
No, I didn't. However, she lived in the same block I did and later moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I met her in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Well, I just wanted to get the chronology of as we go along here to make sure that we don't leave out Mrs. Macklenburg.
Well, she lived in the same block I lived in, and I met some fella up there that said, I know a girl from Oklahoma City, and he introduced me to this girl, Bandy. And I had not visited with her over 10 minutes when we went into an ice cream parlor, and while I was sitting there, I was then 29 years old.
And that took place where? Here?
That in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And so I said, young gal, I'm serving notice on you. I'm going to marry you. I was 29 years old and had never been interested in marrying anybody before. So that was the beginning of my acquaintance with Pansy.
What was her name? Pandy?
Pansy.
Pansy what?
Cardell.
Cardell.
Pansy Cardell.
And you were still working in the bank here at that time?
No, I had left the bank and going into the business of selling oil leases.
Oh, I see.
That was the occasion of me being in South Dakota.
Right. That's fine.
So a day or two later, I was standing in front of the Argus Leader, one of the leading newspapers and the only newspaper in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And they were drawing numbers for the draft. Well, I was just 30, and you wouldn't be drafted after you was 31, so this friend of mine and I were standing out there in the street watching the numbers being drawn. And I had my registration card in my pocket, and the 11th number they pulled out of this draft bowl, I said, my gosh, I believe that's my number. And I looked, and sure enough it was. So I was number 11 on the first draft for World War I. And so I says, goodbye, South Dakota, I'm in the Army. But I remember telling this gal that I was going to marry her, so by golly, we married and come to South Oklahoma, and Ed Overholser was chairman of the draft board, and he gave me 5 days extension, and I went for the Army, married.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all about my Army experience. I stayed until the war was over and finished in the officers training school at Louisville, Kentucky. And an old-timer that's here in Oklahoma City was over there at that time, Vic McGinnis, attorney. I don't know whether you know him or not.
Know his name very well.
But Vic was over there.
Were you overseas?
No, I didn't. I was ready to go and had my hair cut short and sidearms issued, and I got orders to go to officers training school.
Uh-huh.
So that was that.
Now that was, now we're up to this point now where at least the war is over, or you're out of the war. And now what did you do, Mr. Macklenburg?
Well, frankly, when the war was over, I just know what the hell to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the time that the dust was blowing in these windows. I'll get back to that.
That's right.
So my wife and I went out to the fair, and they had a demonstration out there of weather strip by the Chamberlain Metal Weather Strip Company. And we looked at it, and we asked the fella, told him how many windows and doors in our little house, and he said he put the weather strip on for $90. Well, didn't have $9, not only $90, so we looked the weather strip all over, and we went home that night, and I told my wife, Patty, I says, Patty, I can make a weather strip for those windows and doors. It'll keep the dirt out. And I did.
Out of
worked.
what? Out of what did you make it of?
Brass material.
Mm-hmm.
Brass.
Make it right at home?
Strip brass, yes. And so it worked, and I patented this weather strip, and went into the weather strip business. And I did well enough right from the start that we had our own exhibit out to the fair the next year, and have had one ever since.
Now this business...
I don't believe that I would ever have been in the business I am today if I hadn't visited this booth at the State Fairgrounds.
Right. Mm-hmm. How did you start the business? I understand it was a family affair, right?
It was. We started it by, we had Mr. Duncan, whose name still is in our firm. However, he's no longer connected with it. Poor fella, is gone now. But he was the first salesman. And he went out and sold a weather strip.
How much money did you have to start with?
I had none. None.
Where'd you get the money? How did you start?
Well, I just, money was something we part of us were working, and we got enough money to pay we were a German family and all very close, and we had to pool our resources in order to pay the rent and have bacon and beans on the table. But we started out without any machinery whatsoever. We had a little rolling machine that we turned by hand with 2 rollers on it.
I've seen that.
And it turned out this weather strip. And my father and brothers packed it. And they also went out selling. My older brother went out selling, and also my brother Bob went out selling. And we did quite well. We charged a big price for that weather strip then, and knowing nothing about the weather strip and having had an experience as a banker, why, all I could think of was how much profit we could make at the time, and we did quite well. And then we had an opportunity of buying some property out on 23rd Street, which I bought. And we moved out there from a little building down on 1st Street, it was then. We had a room 25 by 70 with a basement, occupied now by the Reeves camera store. And when we moved out to this building, it was 50 by 130 with a little office upstairs.
On 23rd Street?
On 23rd Street.
About where, sir?
What?
About where? On
Between Broadway and Robinson. We still own that block there. We still own the block. And we had at that time, we had arrived at the point where we could buy a 3-horse motor to run this machine. And this little machine with a 3-horse motor was about all we had to move out when we went into this new plant.
Didn't you people design your own rolling machine?
Always did. Always
right.
did, yes, sir. That was part of my job, is designing these machines. And from there on, we just worked hard, left our money in the business, never borrowed any, and we just grew. Just because we worked hard. Nobody threw anything over the transom to us. We had to go out and get it.
Well, you obviously made a good product, too.
Yes, it was a good product. And we stayed behind it in every way, shape, and form. We treated our dealers wonderfully well. And I don't believe that among the 30,000 accounts we have at the time, I could not recall one that had any ill will toward us.
In the course of your business, you went from the brass material, now you're into aluminum, aren't you?
Oh, into various machines, aluminum
Various
and brass and bronze and stainless steel, and it's changed a great deal, yes.
And there are well over 500 employees, aren't there, at the
A
present?
little over 600, aren't they, Bill? I think about 600. And business has been good.
I recall when, not too long ago, when you opened the new section of the plant in which you are now in.
Yes. I think you were over there,
That's
were
right.
you not? I remembered you from then.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes, we
You
did.
was then with Channel
KLC,
5.
That's right.
That's correct, sir.
We did quite a film history there at that time of,
Yeah.
and I'm still my wife is still stepping around the kitchen on the small step stool.
Well, good, good. That's one of the many items that we have devised. In fact, there's rarely a year that we don't take on some new product that we promote. And at the present time, we have quite a large catalog with the various items that we have accumulated and manufactured over the last 45 years.
Well, it's a real homegrown and Oklahoma City business. Approximately how many items, just guess, would you have in the line now? I know it's a
I
rough
would
question.
say that we have about 12 major lines. But in each one of those lines, there's a great variety of products. For instance, weather strip. There's 50 different kinds of weather strip. And caulking compound. There's many grades of it, see. And metal moldings. There's thousands of shapes that are extruded. And I couldn't tell you the number of items, but basically I would say that there would be about 12 or 15 major lines. It had been a great advantage to us, having all of these various lines, because our competition have more or less picked up one line, for instance. Some fella started to make caulking compound. Well, he has to depend entirely on his caulking compound business for his welfare, see? Whereas we have other items that are such that if we would lose all the caulking compound business, we'd still be in business. We'd have something to take its place.
Did you start to diversify like this as a young business? In other words, you almost
Yes,
pioneered.
right from the
Yeah.
beginning, we started to diversify. Yes, sir.
Where did you get the idea that you must diversify your business to make it economically feasible for the entire structure? Just
Where did I get the idea?
yeah, the business idea to diversify your business rather than sticking with, say, just.
Oh well, that was forced upon us because we had a sales force, and the sales force was growing. And in order to maintain that sales force, we had to have other items for them to sell. For had we had all the weather strip business in the United States, it would not have supported our sales force, and without a sales force, of course, you can't go.
Correct.
So that's the answer to that. But you asked me about Oklahoma City. I would like to say that I think there are 4 major factors that had a great deal to do with the development of Oklahoma City. If you want to go into that phase of it, I would like to tell you what my idea is of the things that built Oklahoma City.
I'd like to hear it very much, sir.
Well, in the first place, as I said before, the State Fair had a lot to do with the beginning. Then we had a meeting. I was a young lad then, about 19, 20 years old, of the Chamber of Commerce, and they got the 2 packing plants in Oklahoma City. That was the first major happening, the packing plants. And that's about all we had outside of branch houses for distributorships for a lot of people, but no manufacturing at all. Then after the packing plants, the Chamber of Commerce, under the direction of Stanley Draper, and mainly through his efforts, located the Douglas plant in Oklahoma City. Douglas was not as important to Oklahoma City as what Douglas made possible, the location of Tinker Field. Because when Douglas abandoned their operation, it was an ideal thing for Tinker Field, and Tinker Field, in my opinion, got Oklahoma City from an important town and made it an important city in the United States. And Tinker Field today, while it was a turning point, in my opinion, of Oklahoma City, were we to lose it, it would be another turning point in the other direction.
Right.
But there's no question but what Oklahoma City is located in the center of the state, which is one of the redeeming factors of it. But the eastern part of the state, with its water and natural resources, naturally has a great advantage over this. But Oklahoma City grew in spite of the disadvantages. If they need something, they went after it. They brought it to them. You understand what I mean?
Yes, sir.
And it grew in spite of the disadvantages, entirely due to the spirit of the people that lived in Oklahoma City and that helped build Oklahoma City. That's what made Oklahoma City. And Ed Overholser, as president of the chamber, one of the greatest accomplishments in his lifetime was the developing of this fellow Stanley Draper. If Ed Overholser never did anything else, he did a lot for Oklahoma City. I remember Stanley Draper when he was an awkward boy, come here from North Carolina, big feet, tar on his heels, and he used to fill the water glasses in the Chamber of Commerce at noon. But he developed immensely since that time.
Who were some of the men there besides Mr. Overholzer and yourself?
Well, Frank Buttram and Mr. Gaylord were both very active, and Sidney Brock, a fellow that run a dry goods store here, and another man by the name of Hyman, who run a clothing store, and I just mentioned those men. There are many others, but there are many others, but they are the only ones that come to my mind at the moment. But Oklahoma City is a great city. It's pulled itself up by its own bootstraps.
You can look back quite a few years and not only on success in business, but acquaintanceships and so forth and so on. How do you compare it today with back in those days? Do you still feel that dynamic surge is still here? Although it's...
Yes, I think so. I think there's the same dynamic spirit that there was then, see. It is of a little different type. I don't believe that we have the colorful characters in Oklahoma City that we had 60 years ago. We had some men then who were both very colorful, both good and bad. And it, of course, made the early days in Oklahoma City very interesting. I remember a firm by the name of Oates and Keisel, Polk Oates and Keisel. They were gamblers. They run a gambling house and they run a betting place where you could bet on the horse races. And all of the suckers, including myself, would go in there to bet $2 on this race and that race. And after the knowledge I've gained later, I found out that you could bet on this race for 10 minutes after the race was over if you didn't bet on the winner. They would just let you keep on betting because they had a direct wire and they knew who won the race, so why tell anybody until some fella walked up and wanted to bet $10 on the winner? Why, of course, they would say the betting closed. So it was rather a one-horse race. They would just let you keep on betting because they had a direct wire and they knew who won the race, so why tell anybody until some fella walked up and wanted to bet $10 on the winner? Why, of course, they would say the betting closed. So it was rather a one-horse race, this racehorse business. And they had a lot of character like that in Oklahoma City. They had a saloon here that they called Two John Saloon with sawdust on the floor.
Where was that?
It was across the street from the old Lee Hotel, which is now the Huckin. And they had lots of fights. Had lots of fights, lots of killings in that saloon, that Two John Saloon. But, and then they had a, Mr. Gaylord has written all about this stuff. He knows all about it. They had a fire down in a sporting house they called Big Ann's. And it was quite an event, this fire at Big Ann. Several of the women were burned. And a short time after that, they began to find human ears around in Oklahoma City. They found them in a boxcar and this, that, or the other. And they call it the ear sniffing period. Who clipped the ears, I don't know, but anyway, there were several pairs of ears found. And it was rather connected with this Big Ann episode, see. And then come along a Meadows murder case, which was great, great.
Well, what year was that, sir?
That was, I couldn't tell you the year, a long time ago. It was the year that the Daily Pointer started, and the Daily Pointer featured this Meadows murder case. But, and we had a lot of interesting people. I say both good and bad. But I don't believe while we have the spirit that we had today, I don't believe that we have the colorful character. Maybe that's a good thing.
Well, perhaps life was a little bit different then.
Yes, it
back
was.
in those days.
It was a lot different. It was a lot different. But
Since you were associated with the state fair so many years ago, what do you think of the evolution of that now?
well, I think it's wonderful. I am still an advisory director, honorary director, I believe it is. And I've been connected with the state fair directly and indirectly since 1907 when it started. And I had the pleasure of serving 3 years as its president of the state fair. I felt real fine about that, starting right in at the bottom, taking tickets at a dancing girl's tent, and later became president of it. I was quite proud of that achievement.
Well, this state fair in itself is unique in the fact that it was started as by a nonprofit corporation. Isn't that true?
It was started by a profit organization.
Profit?
Yes, purely for profit, but taken over later by the city. A very short time later, the city took the deal over from Henry Overholser, C.P. Seitz, and C.G. Jones.
Did you see the fair this past year?
No, I just drove through the grounds. I drive through that quite often. But I've known the elevated road they have around there, and I think this bunch of people in the fair did more during the last year to ensure the continuity of the success of the fair than has ever been done before. While they didn't make too much money, they made a lot of progress. And they built a foundation for, in my opinion, a continuance of a successful fair in Oklahoma City.
Mr. L.A., you have a beautiful spot out here where you are now off of Sooner Road. Now, this is your home.
Yes.
And we're enjoying your hospitality and appreciate it very much. I should judge that not too many years ago, this was way out in the boondocks, wasn't it?
Well, we bought this place 35 years ago, and we bought it for living in the country. But we're in the city now, and so it's getting closer all the time.
You also have, which is very well known, a wonderful recreation place here for the employees.
Yes, and it is used more by the general public than it is by our employees. During the summer months, we do not allow anyone to use this park on Saturday and Sunday. That's for our employees. But the other 5 days are occupied every day during the year, and we cannot take care of some of them. It's Boy Scouts and churches and this, that, and other thing that want to use this recreation park. And we are very much pleased that they use it. It's rather our contribution to a civic proposition is the way we look at it.
Well, Mr. L.A., it seems that since you're still so vitally interested in the business, that I doubt if you'll ever really, as they say, retire.
I hope not. I hope not.
Just keep going all the time.
Why, sure. Where is there any point in sitting down and dying? I want to keep going.
Well, you've made, there are many innovations in your business that you people have instituted. I recall, wasn't it 2 years ago that you started this immediate shipping and using air freight as opposed to some of the other manufacturers?
That's right.
How is that working out?
Well, we at the present time use the express company entirely. They pick our stuff out here, and all of our stuff through a special arrangement with them is delivered by freight. But I can readily see in the immediate future that modern way of shipping goods will be by air. It can't help but come. It can't help but come. Because it's expensive at the moment, but when you figure that if you want good distribution over the United States, and we cover the entire United States, we would need 5 or 6 warehouses. But when it comes to time that this stuff can be delivered by air, the cost of delivering it would be less than maintaining the warehouses.
Well, you're in South America also, aren't you?
Oh, we do some business in most all over the world. Not great. Now, I'm not boasting about our export business.
Mm-hmm.
We have never gone after it. It's stuff that's been offered to us. Isn't that correct?
Well, but at least you do have the contacts, and you
Oh,
do have
yes,
certain
we
distribution.
do. We do. We ship quite a little stuff to Africa, don't we, Bill? And
Export division in Houston, Lures and Cook.
peculiarly, one of our good customers is in Lebanon.
Mm-hmm.
What is the name of the main town in Lebanon?
I can't recall offhand, but at least
The American University is located there.
the Mecklenburg Duncan products bear the Oklahoma City label, and they're all over the world, you might say.
Yes, that's true. Well, not to any great extent. We're not boasting about, because there is still such an enormous undeveloped field in America, see,
Mm-hmm.
that if it's properly cultivated, you don't have to look much to the outside for anything.
You sound very much like another gentleman I talked to recently. He said it's very nice and it's very fashionable, supposedly at times, to say that you've taken a trip to Europe to see some of the various
That's
places.
right.
But he has devoted about the last 10 years to traveling around this country.
That's right.
Even to Hawaii and Alaska, our 2 newest states, and says he enjoys it fantastic
Yeah.
because he's seeing what's here at home. Have you done any traveling at all, sir?
Yes, quite a little, and I've never been to Europe and never intend to go. We've been to South America and Hawaii and Canada and Alaska and various places, like you say,
Mhm.
places that are here at home. But I took a trip to Honolulu about, I guess 30 years ago. And I had the idea of, my wife and I went, and I had the idea of charging the expense on this trip to take off my income. I didn't have nerve enough to take it all off. Our expense and everything were amounted to about $3,000, but I did deduct $1,500 for traveling expense for business purposes. That's 30 years ago. I knew it would be questioned. But fortunately, while I was over in Honolulu, I opened an account, Lures and Cook, who are still our major account in Honolulu. And they started a lot of business, doing a lot of business with it. And by the time this income tax return was checked, they were our major customer. So I knew that when this gentleman went over our tax return that he would be critical of this traveling expense for my wife and I to Honolulu. And he brought it up. And I said, well, I'm glad you brought that up. I called the girl and told her, you bring in the sales record of Lures and Cook in Honolulu. And during the period, they had purchased something over $100,000 worth of merchandise from us. And I said, yes, I went over there and opened this account here. That was all.
What do you see in the future of Mecklenburg Duncan?
I see in the future of Mecklenburg Duncan Company a great growth. We have not taken on a lot of things that we could. We're growing slow. The future of Mecklenburg Duncan Company is going to depend entirely on a group of about 10 young men that we have there. And the answer will be how they perform. I have done my best during the last 10 years of telling them everything I know. Whether it will stick or not, I can't tell you.
There are a lot of young people starting out, and Mr. L.A., many young people will be listening to this tape that we're making today in the course of their studies and research, going back not only for the historical aspect of Oklahoma City and the people with whom you were associated and the business that you started and so forth, but there must be some underlying philosophy that you could pass along to these young people.
I would say this about the young people. They continuously make the statement that there is the opportunity there used to be. That is all baloney. Today there's more opportunity for a young man than has ever existed in the history of America. But in order to get there, he must have what it takes. That's the answer to it. But if some fella says to you, we do not have the opportunity, he doesn't know what he's talking about. You have to make that opportunity. So many of them are sitting around waiting for it to be laid in their lap, and it doesn't come that way. Got to stick their neck up above the crowd. When they do, they're going to get some bricks thrown at it, but they can't get up there without sticking their neck out. That's right.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. I think I've said too much.
No, I hope we didn't tire you.
Well, this is the first time I've ever had an interview of this nature, and I've had a little buck fever. I hope it don't show on it.
I don't think so.
Okay.
As you know, it's going to be used basically for study and research and so forth.
Well,
and I think it'll contribute immeasurably to the living legend library at Oklahoma Christian College.
I thank you for coming out, and I appreciate the opportunity.